Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to the afternoon session of the Western and Southern Area Planning Committee. For those who have joined this afternoon, the Council has suspended face-to-face meetings since the introduction of the COVID-19 regulations. The new regulations now enable decision-making processes to continue in accordance with government guidance on social distancing, and this meeting is being conducted under new rules for all remote workings following changes to the legislation. A recording of the meeting will be available following the meeting. So, as we reconvene, we will now have a roll call of members. David Gray. David?
Sorry, Chair. Present.
David is present. Peter Barrow?
Present.
Thank you, Peter. Kelvin Clayton?
I'm here, Chair.
Susan Cocking?
Present, Chair.
Jean Dunseith?
Present, Chair.
Nick Ireland?
Present.
Louis O'Leary has sent his apologies. Councillor David Shortell?
Present and correct, Chairman.
Okay, thank you, everyone. For those who have just joined us.
Present, Chair.
Okay.
Councillor Weller as well.
Councillor Weller and Councillor Sarah Williams.
Present.
Okay, thank you very much. For those who've just joined us, there will be a presentation by the planning officer, including any updates since the last report was published. A named officer will then read the public written submissions. Then the case officer and other specialist officers will respond to any points of clarification arising from the further public participation. The committee will then debate the application. Committee members, in the normal way, do use the chat box to indicate if you wish to speak. And then the case officer and other specialist officers will be available to clarify that any points that need answering. Also this afternoon, we should have in attendance Anne Collins, the area manager, Western and Southern team. Good afternoon, Anne.
Good afternoon, Chair.
We should have Councillor Bob Burden, Senior Planning Officer, in respect of the application this afternoon.
I'm here, Chair, but obviously not a
Philip Crowther, Solicitor.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Colin Graham, Highways Officer.
Good afternoon, Chair.
Okay. Chelsea Golage will read the written representations. And just to advise you that Denise Hunt, who did a sterling effort in clerking this morning, despite all her difficulties, has been replaced by Fiona King. So without any further ado, we will now move on to item 5D of today's agenda, which is WP/19/01016/FUL, St Nicholas's Church, Buxton Road, Weymouth, and our case officer is Bob Burden.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. Just a little bit of housekeeping to start with, Chairman. A little update on the as regards the committee update sheet. A letter of objection from Mr. Hillary, who lives in the bungalow to the rear. He believes the proposed building will block TV signals to his property. I would comment, however, that would be a private matter, but given the relationship between the proposed and existing buildings, I would be surprised if that were a problem, is the comment I would make. I also have a letter which came through with your update sheet from Councillor Sutton, who, in summary, she says she understands the residents' concerns and their wishes for it to be just 2 stories, but she believes it's important to protect the character of the conservation area, but it's also important to provide smaller units of affordable housing, as in this case. She quite likes the design and supports the application. Right, just to locate you, Chairman, here we are on A354. This is the Buxton Road, which runs between Portland in that direction and Weymouth in this direction. That's Burn Road up there. and Connaught Road is up there. The site is defined by the red line here. It's within the conservation area. In the conservation area, Connaught Road Conservation Area is in this area here, running along and including properties around Connaught Road and 1 or 2 in Down Road. We have, in this situation, we have a number of older properties in the area. Victorian impressive building here, Elsedine 1 Verne Road. We have the Victorian villas along here, 20, number 18 being adjacent to the site. Bungalow at the rear of the site I mentioned. There are also at a higher level other dwellings here further up the slope to the rear. I just point out also on here, we see that the footprint of the existing church shown also as a dotted line here within the site. And obviously the footprint of the proposed building is this L-shaped block shown here. So that is the existing church which is on the site, St Nicholas Church. That's the elevation which faces the road. It's sort of the equivalent of a 1.5-storey building in height, about 5.6 metres high. A prefabricated construction with a felt roof. It is a building which contains asbestos within its materials, so it's a building that dates from the early 1960s and obviously an interesting but somewhat unusual type of building. Moving on to this block plan, Chairman, we have more detail showing the footprint of the building here. You can see there is car parking at the rear of the site. Part of it is in an undercroft underneath the building, and part of it is in the rear at a sunken level there. The scheme involves a reduction in the width of the large bellmouth vehicular access onto the highway, such that it would be reduced to 4.5 metres wide in this location here. There'd also be a new pedestrian access put in at that point there, adjacent to the bus stop. Also showing on here is that the bungalow at the rear, and in pre-application discussions I had with the applicant, Chairman, I emphasised the need to ensure that the outlook from that bungalow and its principal living room window here was not greatly obstructed by the new building, and hence this space here to the side has been left, such you now see there's a large sort of sphere of view from that bungalow at the rear, which extends and giving views over Portland Harbour and the Isle of Portland. I'd also mention that a number of letters have raised the issue of building line, and the positioning of the building here. You can see you've obviously got the building line and the veranda of the Victorian villas here, and this building very much respects that building line in terms of its general alignment. It might be very slightly forward in terms of the balconies and that, but in essence, I would regard that as being substantially in line with the existing building line. And of course, we have the bar store over here, which is a lot nearer to the road, only 4 metres back, that building there, whereas this is pushed significantly further back on the site. I just point out some recycling facilities on the site which are positioned here, and refuse bins in that location there. So this shows more clearly the undercroft car parking. We have 16 car spaces in this area here, together with that area there, and we have 2 spaces at the front of the site here, making a total of 18 spaces for 18 units. There are sort of 2 areas of amenity space. One is this area here, which envelops the western side of the site, and there's another area I'll show you shortly on another slide. This just gives you an idea of the layout. Each flat is 2-bedroomed and is 67 square metres in area, and this is effectively the front elevation down here. Front elevation is down here, and the rear elevation over here. What I'll mention at this point is that with the close relationship with the garden and the bungalow next door, I looked very carefully at that relationship and actually met the occupier of that bungalow on site to discuss the relationship of this site with his property. And as a result of that, some amendments have been made to the fenestration. On the rear elevation, there are what we call pop-out windows. So the north-facing windows, that would be obscure glazed, and only the sides would be transparent glazed. So that protects amenity at the rear, but allows views along the back of the building within the application site. And similarly, the same has been done in relation to 1 Burn Close on the east elevation here, in that part of the building, and on that elevation where there are pop-out windows. This is the proposed street scene. Here we have the impressive Victorian villas here with hipped roofs, and you'll notice a rhythm of 2-1-2 fenestration. And in discussions with the applicant and involving our conservation officer, the conservation officer was keen to try and echo that rhythm to some extent in this. So 1 sort of 2 1 2 1. The sort of rhythm of the window arrangement is sort of carried forward into part of the design of this. The recessing of the top floor is also interesting because, to my mind, with the hipping of the roof of the Victorian villas, that's slightly echoed by the recessing of that roof. So there's a sort of a slight hip effect in visual connotation terms to that. There are also balconies and railings which show more clearly on other photographs. Also to point out that the height of the building is, you'll notice, below the height of the Victorian villas. So it's not, although it's obviously a large building and replace a smaller building, you can see the outline in red here of the existing church. So that's about 5.6 metres high, and this is about another 5.5 metres extra height on top of that, but still lower than the height of the Victorian villas. And you can also see on this street scene the bungalow positioning at the rear. I mentioned the large living room window to that, which would have an unobstructed view through, retained, and that's an outline of a dwelling further up the slope, approximately about 48 metres away from the back of what would be the eastern outshoot end of the building, so some way back further up the slope those. And number 1, the Verne Elsedine, is the building over here. And this is a section through the whole area. So yeah, Buxton Road here, 2-storey older dwellings on the south side of Buxton Road are shown here. And into our application site, the outline of the existing church shown with the red line there. And then you can see that the proposed building is excavated, significantly dug down into the site. You'll appreciate there are already quite significant differences in level from the road up to the garden area of the bungalow behind before the land rises further to the rear of that. So you can see how the building has been dug in to some extent. Height-wise, see how it relates to a general line of sight running up the slope there. The western end of the proposed building is given by that face there, and that's about 22 metres from the front of the bungalow here, number 16 Buxton Road. And the far eastern end, but facing north of the proposed building, is here, which is nearer to the garden at number 16 as its far end, which I'll show you in another photo shortly. So looking at the elevations of the proposed building, the front elevation here, you can see there's a lot of interest and articulation put into the building through recessing of wall lines, projecting balconies, an ornate, interesting design of swept railing, which I'll show you more clearly in another illustration shortly. So there's quite a lot of visual interest in the appearance of the building, so that it doesn't appear just as one large, massive bulk, which I think helps in design terms. Also in material terms, it would be rendered below with a buff brick above, and that buff brick we would choose to be very similar to the buff brick used in the Victorian villas off to the western side of the site to help blend it into the materials of the site. On the rear of the building, This is facing the property in garden at number 16. I mentioned the pop-out windows, and these two windows here would each serve bedrooms, and by putting in obscure glazing on the north-facing element of those windows, but allowing views out to the side of the pop-out windows, we can safeguard residential amenity and protect residential amenity of the property behind. This is stairway windows and a doorway out into a rear amenity space there, leading down to further amenity space there. These are all kitchen windows, and those are bedroom windows. I haven't considered it expedient to require pop-out windows over here as I did there, and I'll explain that why when I come to another photo shortly. But on the east elevation, again, that's an area where there would be some overlooking of the grounds of Won the Burn, so pop-out windows have been incorporated on the larger principal windows of that elevation too. I'll also mention that on the roofing area, the balcony areas exclude any pedestrian balcony areas on the rear north elevation to safeguard residential amenity, and on the west elevation down here to help safeguard residential amenity. So this is just a visual provided by the applicant to give a general impression of the nature of the building. But you can see a lot of visual interest in terms of balconies, projecting balconies, the wavy railing design, which was something our conservation officer was very keen to achieve, and the setback of the top floor and the general sort of buff brick and materials approach. This also shows that there is scope for some landscaping along the frontage of the site there, which would, I think, would be beneficial to just help assimilate it into the character of the site. This is the photo of the front garden of 16 Buxton Road. Indeed, there isn't a back garden because the bungalow sits in the northwest corner of the plot here, and we have in front of the building itself, and you can see a large vehicle turning area with open lawn area, and our site is over the retaining wall here, the other side of that, and you can see the roof of the church there and the many trees that are present in the grounds of Won the Burn, particularly the several yew, large willow, the ginkgo tree along just within the boundary of Won the Burn at the eastern end of the site. So in this photo, you notice there's a sort of more screen sort of area here, and beyond that, there is a much more secluded and private area of garden, and that's why I've used the pop-out windows to safeguard amenity down at the eastern end of the site, so that windows would not overlook that private amenity space of the dwelling. As I said, the dwelling's in an unusual situation in any event because it's set right in the northwest corner of the plot behind the site. And this is a view standing in front of the large living room of the bungalow, looking due south, and you can see they have a pleasant view over Portland Harbour to the Isle of Portland. And my estimate is that the new western end wall of the proposed building would be approximately on that line there. So it would allow a good substantial view through over that panorama. This is a view looking west along Buxton Road. So you'll appreciate from this, we have a few shops in the area, a fish and chip shop, pharmacy, there's a convenience store here as well, and several other shops. Bath store over here, as you can see, that's very close to the road compared with our proposal today. And moving up here, our site is in this area here with a wide bell mouth there. You can just see the edge of the church there. And here you see the substantial blocks of the Victorian villas beyond our site there, with an extension on the end of them. That's just to show you that the building to the historic Victorian building, Elsedine, Won the Burn, to the east of the application site, set well back, and the trees that adjoin the eastern side of the site. The site itself, we have the church here, retaining wall with the difference in level. Good view of the bungalow at the rear here. You can see with that large window with that view I showed you earlier. That's a bedroom window. That's bedroom. That's a bed or storeroom in the roof space there. And there's a double garage at this end. And obviously you'll appreciate the site, the character of the site at the moment, a large expanse of tarmac, some grass areas as well, but a fairly sort of open gap, as it were, in the street scene. So moving to the other end of site, looking at Buxton Road, better view here of the Victorian villas and the character of those buildings. Also show the bus stop just in front of the site there, and a good view of the substantial trees that are adjacent to the east boundary of the site. And then here, just zooming in slightly, go through the church. You see, you do get some parking on street, and I know we've had a number of letters over highway safety, given the busy nature of the road and the importance of the route. And no doubt the highways officer may, if you wish him to, comment a little bit further on that issue. We've got the pedestrian crossing as well there, close to the site. And their site's in there. This is the view standing on the application site, looking due south over the rough grassland of the site and the extensive car park in the front, with some little views through to either side. So main planning issues, principle of development, you'll gather from my report, we've looked quite carefully at the principle of development, given that it would involve the loss of a community site with a community building on it. But this is one of those cases where, given that they are looking to use this site as a means effectively to help fund and improve a local hub, the Holy Trinity Church down by Town Bridge, less than a mile away into Weymouth, that is consistent with policy COM3 of the local plan. Another issue of relevance is that there are quite a lot of other local community facilities, local community churches in the immediate area, as I've set out in my report. We have also often the situation where quite often there are falling congregation numbers. In this case, we were looking at a situation where congregation numbers, worshippers, were quite often between 6 and 12. So there's opportunities to, if you like, reinforce and consolidate and better use existing other community facilities rather than this site. And you'll see from the nature of the building also, it's a building of some age, and its condition is also problematic in some ways. Some additional positives though, of course, if it were to be used for the site for affordable housing, then obviously there's an element of community benefit that comes with that. Furthermore, in my view and in the Conservation Officer's view, it would involve a repairing of the street scene and an enhancement of the conservation area in an appropriate way. So 100% affordable housing, as I mentioned, 18 units, each 2-bedroom, 67 square metres. It would be a useful contribution towards our 5-year housing land supply, which at the moment is 4.83 years. So that's an important factor to bear in mind. The effect on the conservation area, as I said, I consider that the siting, the design and the materials would enhance this part of the Connaught Road conservation area. The effect on residential amenities, something I looked at very carefully, as you'll gather from what I've said in my account and in the report. And I think that is safeguarded through this scheme. Highway safety, that's something which clearly I've looked at and the highways officer has looked at, and he's satisfied that subject to conditions, this is an appropriate development. So moving on to my recommendation, I'm recommending you delegate approval subject to conditions and to a section 106 to ensure the units are used for affordable housing. So the conditions, fairly standard type of conditions to start with, and then wall and roof materials, obviously important that we get the wall materials that are a particularly good match, similar to the Victorian villas to the west side. Window details, surface water drainage scheme, that would be underground cellular storage, which is approved by our flood risk management officer. Floor level details, important to make sure we get the building set at the right level so that it integrates properly into the street scene. Hard and soft landscaping details would be good to address. And then I said it in some detail there, just talking about the pop-out windows and those where I've specified them on the north elevation and on the east elevation, and also the safeguarding of areas on the top floor so that there can't be outdoor balconies which would overlook from the north or the west side onto neighbouring properties. Biodiversity mitigation plan has been agreed. I would also recommend a condition for a charging scheme to ensure we have the facility to plug in ultra low emission vehicles, means of enclosure details to the boundaries, access crossing details, the highways conditions, parking and turning, and no surface water to drain onto the highway. And recommendation B is just to ensure that the if permission was delegated, Chairman, that the 106 is moved on in a timely manner. So to conclude, I would say that I would recommend that you delegate authority to approve, subject to the 106 and the conditions as set out, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Burden. Now, for people who've joined us this afternoon, the committee has received a number of written representations submitted in accordance with the amended speaking protocol for planning committee meetings, and we will now hear those letters read out by an officer who's not involved in the application, and they will be taken in the following order: firstly, objectors; secondly, supporters. We will also hear from the ward councillor Brian Heatley, and we will move forward with that. So good afternoon, Chelsea. I understand you're going to read the letters of representation.
Oh yes, thank you, Chairman. The first comment is from Paul Gardner. I have no objection to the proposed development in principle. However, there are 2 points which I would ask the committee to consider. Firstly, the overall design is completely unsympathetic with the surrounding area. Surely a design that blends with the surroundings is all part of the conservation requirements in a conservation area. Secondly, the size is much too large and will dominate the area and be an eyesore if allowed as proposed. The next is from Peter and Elizabeth Hillary. We reside directly to the rear of St Nicholas Church. Our garden area is to the front and sides of our property. We have no rear garden. The proposed new build will be directly in front of our property and directly in front of our garden. The height and extent of the proposed new build will therefore create a loss of privacy, a loss of light, and a serious loss of value to our property. The next is from Kate Inkster. Further to my letter of objection already submitted when the proposal was first revealed, I wish to underline my concerns. The site is going to be overdeveloped. 18 two-bedroom units is too much for this area. Look at the density of existing housing nearby. There are no gardens or shared outdoor space or nearby parks or playgrounds, which make these units quite unsuitable for families with children. The facade of the block of flats looks like an office block and not a residential unit. It needs to blend in with the existing houses and premises within the street line and area. The building is too high, 4 stories. It will not blend in with the height of the surrounding buildings, despite clever drawings to mitigate this within the plans. It will greatly overlook and overshadow a number of houses around the perimeter of the site. Not enough provision has been made for car parking of potential residents. It would be prudent to anticipate 2 cars per unit and also visitors. The local roads around the site cannot cope with yet more people looking to park here. It sits near a busy pedestrian, therefore, and on thoroughfare and on a busy road. Access into the site would be across the pavement, very near to a pedestrian crossing, which is again another potential danger to pedestrians. Why can the plan not be for several modest and affordable houses, 2/3 bedroomed, in line with the road frontage, providing adequate parking and small gardens? The next comment is from Mark Packer. St Nicholas Church is situated in the Connaught Conservation Area, designated in 2001 as an area of architectural and historical interest because of the Victorian buildings within it. The adjacent buildings to the church are both mentioned in the designation, the villas to the west and Elsedine to the east. The proposed development will change a site with no housing and limited traffic to an excessively large 4-storey block of 18 flats with limited architectural merit and no attempt to integrate into the aesthetics of the adjacent buildings. There will be a marked increase in traffic entering onto a busy A road, both during potential construction and afterwards, not just residents but visitors, delivery and taxi drivers and tradespeople. The entrance is flanked by a bus stop and a pedestrian crossing, and the road is especially busy at school drop-off and collection times. Parking is limited and there will be overspill onto adjacent roads, already full of parked cars as these houses do not have garages. The building line has been drawn as a diagonal from the Victoria Villas to the Bath store. This is erroneous. The Bath store should not be considered in the building line as this is for commercial use and lies on the opposite side across Fern Road. The building line should be parallel to the villas to the east. The green space will be covered in concrete and there will be a water runoff down the steep slopes on Carton Road and Sudan Road. It seems that the magical words affordable housing are used to shoehorn development approval. These flats will not remain affordable for long. They will be sold at a premium as soon as it is feasible, as they are highly desirable with their commanding views of Portland Harbour and close proximity to Castle Cove and Sandsfoot Beach. They will be second homes in next to no time. If the council really wanted some affordable housing, then they could convert a lot of existing large properties or office blocks in the town into flats without removing green spaces. I have no objection to development on the site, but this should be a sympathetic design, something along the lines of the old fire station site at the bottom of Boot Hill, or the two-storey terraced houses built at Prospect Place in Chapel Hay. Properties could be built to mirror the red brick properties on the opposite side of the road. A development would say 8 terraced houses will still be profitable, just not profitable enough. The motivation appears to be greed. The next comment is from Julie Price. I would like to register my objection to the plans to redevelop St Nicholas Church, Weymouth, which is situated in the Connaught-Cotswoldshire area. Whilst I understand the current pressures to build housing, the plan for 18 flats in this plot does not have any architectural merit and will simply create traffic pressures and other problems for those living in this area. The plans do not seem to fit with the architecture of the area and will inevitably increase people and traffic movements in an already busy location. Additionally, the loss of green space to be replaced by concrete and paving will be detrimental to the environment. The plan squeezes in as many flats as possible into a small area without wider consideration of the impact to those living alongside it or to those who will be living in the new flats. Other plans for development in Weymouth, plans for less residences in a large area, have been turned down, and I hope that the council will, in similar fashion, turn down the planned redevelopment of St Nicholas Church. The next is from Chris Peplow. First, a personal comment. Although my home is and was shown to be affected by the proposed development, I was surprised and disappointed not to have heard from Dorset Council in the first place. News of the plan application came from neighbours. I had no contact from Dorset Council until I contacted them. I can only guess at the reasons for this. In any case, this has left me with very little confidence in the new unitary authority. Regarding the development, this will affect my outlook and I will be overlooked by the proposed property. I find it hard to believe that mitigation for this is the provision of frosted glass. The latest documentation mentions the Bath store. Are the committee aware that this shop has been closed for around 6 months and we can assume that it will not reopen as a commercial property? Will this site become another block of flats in short time? Is this the thin end of the wedge? Has local planning come to allow piecemeal and willy-nilly development? I have an interest in clean and public transport in Weymouth. I work on the Granby Industrial Estate, which is the largest industrial zone in Weymouth, and pre-coronavirus I walk to work. This is a 40-minute walk across town. There are no bus routes from the vicinity of the proposed development to the Granby. The only way to take public transport to the Granby would be a bus into the town centre, then another bus out again. This would both be time-consuming, approximately 1 hour, and expensive. There are no cycle routes to the Granby. The nearest cycle route is the Rodwell Trail, which can only be reached by travelling along 1 or 2 main roads. It is unbelievable to think that residents of the proposed development will be able or willing to spend nearly 2 hours a day getting to work across town. They will have no option but to drive. This brings me to parking. Congestion due to cars parked on the local roads is already a problem in the area, particularly at school times. The authorities know of local problems of both traffic and congestion and lack of access for emergency vehicles. This is a main route to Portland for the emergency services. There is a new housing development being undertaken along the road. This will not help the parking situation, and the situation will be exacerbated if another 18 flats are built within the inadequate parking. Furthermore, Buxton Road is a known road pollution black spot. What is the reason for allowing balconies close to and facing the busy road in front of a bus stop? The next comment is from Louise Peplow. We live directly behind this proposed development. We did not and have not received any direct consultation or notification. Whilst the site does need development, the height and scale is too big for such a small site. Despite the sight lines details on the plans, the 45-degree angles are taken from our rooftop. As a bungalow, our main living areas and the bedrooms are downstairs, which will mean the building will loom over us and the rear elevation will directly overlook our bedroom windows, causing a loss of privacy, overshadowing, a loss of amenity together with noise pollution. We believe it will devalue our property and make it difficult to sell. This has and continues to cause us significant distress. The Weymouth Town Council objected to a development further down Buxton Road, WP 1901-013 full, on the grounds of density of the development, overshadowing and loss of privacy, loss of amenity, the development not being in keeping with the character of local buildings, traffic safety, ability to exit on the highway. Surely for the same reasons, this development should also be scaled back. These same concerns are raised here and cannot be dismissed purely on the basis that the housing is to be affordable. It cannot be democratic for there to be one rule for private developments and one rule for affordable housing if the same effects apply. Despite the Conservation Officer's comments regarding the balconies, this proposed building is completely out of keeping with the surrounding area. It is simply an attempt to fit more dwellings into the site than would normally be allowed on the basis that they are affordable. The same planning rule should apply whether private or affordable. On reading the agenda, this smacks of the decision already having been made, and the replies by the consultees to the objections and conservation area concerns have been dismissed as not a problem and overridden simply because it is deemed affordable. We all know that it will not remain as affordable housing on a prime site with sea views. A development such as a row of small terraced villas similar to that on Boot Hill would be far more aesthetically pleasing and in keeping. Developments are being shoehorned into inadequate sites, and legitimate concerns of both residents and the wider community who have to live with the consequences are being overridden, the motivation being purely financial. I would respectfully ask that the committee put a brake on speculators, reject this plan as it stands and request that they think again, redesign it in keeping with the conservation area and lower the density to take into account the damaging effect on neighbouring properties. The next comment is from Ken Packer. I object most strongly to the application to build a large block of 18 flats on the site of St Nicholas Church in Buxton Road, Weymouth. This site is within a conservation area where there are strict constraints on the size and design of new buildings which the developer has not adhered to. The application also gives an artist's impression of the proposed new building as one would approach from the east along Buxton Road. It would be a shock to see the extreme clash in style with the more 1880s Victorian building beyond. A modern building with a predominance of large windows against the modest sash windows of the Victorian building. Also, the Victorian building covers less than 30% of their site, while the proposal for the block of flats on this site covers up to 70% of its site. This is because the development site is half site, because to the rear, around 70 years ago, a modern bungalow was built. This illustrates clearly that the proposed development is far too big for its site. Most people have commented on the dreadful problems that will also certainly occur with vehicle access to and from the site, especially as there is only one common exit access point. I agree with all comments and all the worries expressed, as this in-out point is only 2 metres from a pedestrian crossing and 6 metres from a busy bus stop. I cannot believe that the traffic advisor has not highlighted a major problem here. It is after all the main A road to Portland. Of course, it is very quiet just now as all the schools are closed, the sailing centre also, and all visitors' attractions on Portland, as well as no cruise ships at Portland Port. The next comment is from Kay Packer. You will have received my objections to the above plan application, but I'd like briefly to reiterate my concerns. Please note, I am not against development of the site nor against affordable housing, but would like to see it done in a sympathetic manner in keeping with the area. The site is in a conservation area, and the modern design of this application is totally out of keeping with surrounding houses. The conservation area would appear to be happy with the small concessions the developer has put in place. The density of the plan for 18 flats is a gross overdevelopment of this small site. A building half the size would be much more appropriate and would not impact on the area as much. Most of the site will be concreted over. The flats will totally overshadow 2/3 of the garden at 16 Buxton Road, which will be dwarfed by this huge 4-storey building. The single entrance exit to the flats is between a traffic controlled crossing and a bus stop on the extremely busy A354 main road to Portland, and cars will have to cross a very well used pavement to access this road. I totally disagree with the highways officer who says that 18 vehicles plus service vehicles would not cause a problem on this busy road and even busier pavement at school times. Parking is at a premium in this area, and where will any overspill from this application park? Please note there has been no provision for visitors' cars in the plan. Parking in Corton Road and Verne Road is already congested as most of the houses there don't have a garage. Finally, I would like to ask that this application be turned down for all the above reasons, with a recommendation that a smaller building would be more appropriate for this site. The next comment is from Debbie Moore. This proposal will change a site with no housing and limited traffic to a large 4-storey block of 18 flats, which neither fits in nor complements the adjacent buildings, both of which are mentioned in the designation of this area, the Connaught Conservation Area. In 2001, as of architectural and historical interest because of the Victorian buildings within it. Because of the number of dwellings proposed, there will be a considerable increase in the amount of traffic on this busy A road. A bus stop and pedestrian crossing are next to the site, both open to increased danger with the increase in traffic. Parking is also potentially a problem as there is very limited parking available on site. The building line has been drawn as a diagonal from the Victorian villas to the bath store, but the bath store should not be considered in the building line as this is for commercial use and lies on the opposite side across Fern Road. The building line should be parallel to the villas to the east. There are potential drainage problems that have not been addressed. The grassed area on the site will disappear, so water will instead run off down the steep slopes of Corton Road and Sudan Road. The proposal is for affordable housing. Realistically, they will be sold at a premium as soon as it is feasible, as they are highly desirable with their commanding views of Portland Harbour and close proximity to Castle Cove and Sandsfoot Beach. They will be second homes in next to no time. I am not objecting to the site being appropriately developed, rather to the unsuitability of the current proposals in terms of fitting in with building regulations as to height, the density of the housing, and that the plans are not suitable for this conservation area. That's all the comments. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much, Chelsea. In the normal way, we will now hear from Mr. Burden, the case officer. Mr. Burden, I invite you to respond on any points of clarification arising from public participation in the form of the reading out of those letters, and then I will ask Mr. Colin Graham, the highways officer, for any comments that he has in response to points raised in those letters. So, Mr. Burden.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a matter of procedure. Is there any communication from the applicant, any letter from them at all in support of their application? Sometimes we get those.
There isn't anything listed from the applicant or agent as part of today's business.
I just thought I'd check, because quite often we do get that. Right, yes, there's a few points I would just like to respond to, Chairman, thank you. A comment was made that they feel the residents feel the development is an overdevelopment of the site. What I would point out is that amenity space was a consideration that was mentioned, and indeed somebody thought there wasn't any amenity space with the scheme, but there is in fact over 200 square metres of communal amenity space provided, and that is consistent with our policy on communal amenity space for new build flats. Also, the car parking, 1 space per unit, is consistent with the Dorset Council guidelines on parking, and no doubt Colin Graham is available for a little bit more information on that if required. There was mention that the units might start off as affordable housing but then will become second home. So that would not be the case, because we would ensure through the legal agreement that these units can only be used for bona fide affordable housing purposes. So that would continue in perpetuity. One or two mentioned that they didn't receive original letters on the application. I suspect the reason for that is because their properties didn't actually physically adjoin the red line of the application site, which would be a likely explanation on that point, Chairman. The properties that are behind number 16 Buxton Road, the bungalow, higher up the slope, those are the gardens of those at the nearest point to the proposed building are about 46 metres away, so there is quite some distance there, and I don't think there would be an issue there in terms of overshadowing or unacceptable overlooking. Comment was made by Mrs. Peplow that the decision has already been made on this application. Well, of course, that isn't the case. We as officers make a recommendation and members make the decision. That's why we're here today, to consider the merits of the scheme. Several people focused on the building line issue. Well, as I showed on the plan, I think it's broadly consistent with the front line of 18 to 20, the Victorian villas. So I think that's a fairly reasonable positioning of the building. Somebody mentioned the surface water drainage has not been addressed. Well, in fact, it has, because a report on drainage has been submitted to the flood risk management officer, who is happy with the principle of the cellular underground drainage scheme on the site and recommends conditions, and those are covered in my conditions, Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So for the purposes of clarification, we're going to hear next from Colin Graham, because we've had lots of comments about highways, and then we're going to hear from the ward councillor Brian Heatley. So Mr. Graham, whilst things are fresh in your mind, do you have any comments in relation to highways from what you've heard?
Good afternoon, Chair. Colin Graham, Dorset Council, Highways Liaison Officer. The main thing is the site. One has to take into account the existing extant use, which is for Class D1 for the church. Obviously, churches aren't just Sunday mornings. There can be for multiple functions. I appreciate in recent years that might have been fairly quiet, which is why the site's now looking at being redeveloped. But it's there nevertheless. Also is the fact, yes, it is on a main road, so accessibility via the highway is therefore good. If we go back to that photograph that showed the entrance, its proximity to the crossing, I've noted that straight away. It's a very wide vehicle crossing as well. It's very unconstrained. So the access is going to be moved away, so it's equidistant between the crossing and the bus stop, and which is just lies to the west, to the left of that photo. So that will make it safer. It's going to, there we go. It's going to be narrower, so that will constrain it and reduce the speeds down and tighten up the angle. It will mean that pedestrians have less conflict. The conflict zone, as we call it, is narrowed accordingly. It's about 134 metres from the Rodwell Trail, which provides very good sustainable access both into the town and town centre for walking and cyclists, and also to the south to Portland and other places. In terms of safety, there's no accident history recorded accident history within 110 metres of the site, and there's one to the west which was on the bridge over the Rodwell Trail. That's 134 metres, as I say. And the other one's 109 metres to the west. So it's a safe location, and the intention is to make it safer. The church could have had, with its extant use, could have events on of multiple movements throughout the day, any evenings, any times. So I'd expect the flats to potentially be of a lower use. The Cartoon Road is due opposite on the other side of Buxton Road to the south, and that's a one-way heading south. So vehicle movements, they only turn in, they don't come out from that. So that's a benefit. That's about as much as I can think to add to it, to be honest. The quantity of car parking. The Bournemouth, Dorset and Pool residential parking calculator, that is advisory, it's guidance, and there's no minimum standards in it. Government ages ago, central government, changed us to quoting maximums and leaving it very much in the hands of developers to say what is or isn't suitable. At the end of the day, they have to sell their flats, and we have to take into account, as I say, it is on a bus route and near a cycle route. So from that point of view, it's sustainable, and I've got nothing further to add, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Graham. We will now hear from Councillor Brian Heatley. Hello, Councillor Heatley. Good afternoon.
Thank you, Chair.
I've given you the opportunity to speak after Mr. Graham, and I'm sure you may have picked up on one or two things there. So I'm looking forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you for letting me speak, given I made such a complete mess of telling you that I wanted to speak this afternoon. And thank you also for the whole committee hearing this case. I know that that was something that was very important for my local residents. This application actually consists of a real conflict between two very desirable objectives. One is providing much needed affordable housing. The other is protecting the nature and amenity of the surrounding area. Now, the report suggests that this building will enhance the character of the conservation site, and indeed Bob Burden referred to that. I think the weight of evidence and the things that have been said by the objectors suggests that that is not the view of most of the people who live around the site, and I must admit I'm inclined to agree with them. I think that a real effort has been made to try to create a building which is sympathetic to the area, but I still think that there is going to be something of a reduction in amenity and in how nice the conservation area looks. However, and this is where the conflict comes, the need for affordable housing, particularly in smaller units like this, and particularly for rent, which this will be, is especially acute in Weymouth, and this will make a real contribution. This is 18 units, and it's about 100 that are estimated to be needed in Weymouth each year. In the end, the needs of people who are desperately in need of this type of housing, to my mind, outweighs the important desire of local residents to protect the look and feel and amenity of their area. I'm sorry about that. I represent them, but you have to weigh these things in the balance. We simply don't get opportunities for affordable housing like this very often, and so I support this application. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Heatley. Members who would like to begin? Do we have any comments? Councillor Nick Ireland.
Okay, I'll kick off. Yeah, I'm on the same page as Brian, to be honest. There's not many opportunities we have for affordable housing, and I know, despite some of the comments, you know, this is for rent. They're not going to be turned into second homes. I'm assuming that's not going to be possible because it's going to be run by a housing association or wherever. And I also noted that somebody said that it wasn't very close to a cycle route. I cycle. The access to Royal Trail is just down by the bridge. It's only like 150 metres away. So I'm actually happy to support this, and if you're looking for a proposer, I'll be it.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Burden, do you have anything to add to that? The comments of the conservation officer, the fact that the properties are to rent?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that properties are for rent, it's a tenure in this situation that the housing enabling team leader is perfectly happy with. He's very supportive of the application. In terms of the conservation area impact, obviously it does involve a subjective judgment. You know, there's an understandable rationale for this. It respects the mass of existing buildings, but obviously it does introduce a modern contemporary approach. But it is a building that has quite a lot of visual interest and articulation to the elevations, and I think with the use of a buff brick to be very similar to the buff brick used in the Victorian villas to the west, I think that would be a really important visual link between the existing and proposed, Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, I'll certainly pick up on your comment about the brick. We've got a whole queue of people wishing to speak, and I'm going to start with Councillor Kate Weller.
Thank you, Chairman.
Good afternoon, Kate.
Good afternoon. Some of the public, so that the letters were saying that it was out of keeping and what a shame it wasn't more like the development down at the bottom of Boot Hill. I have to say personally, I'm jolly glad it's not a pastiche toy town like the bottom of Boot Hill. I think that it's an interesting development, and as Mr. Burden says, it does reflect other architecture there. I think the developers have been very imaginative in maintaining that view for the bungalow behind, because I'm sure they would have been very sad to lose that view. So I think that that's been very considerate and very imaginatively achieved. I too am delighted that it's affordable houses. That's exactly what we need. I have only one point to make, and I address it actually to Mr. Graham, and I'd like him please to speak to other departments in his highways department. And it is that a couple of years ago now, we approved a development on Portland Road, not entirely exactly the same, but in a very similar situation where it's a commercial property, but it's right on the pedestrian crossing. I objected to that at the time and said that it would lead to problems. It has indeed led to problems, and we're now having to mitigate those problems and make them safe. And it's always very, very much more difficult to make an area safe that you've created a danger at than to deal with it in the first place. So, Mr. Graham, please speak to your counterparts and see whether we can't do something about that pedestrian crossing before it becomes a problem, rather than we as ward councillors have to come to you in 12 months' time and say, this is a problem, what can you do about it? Other than that, I am absolutely in favour of this application, I'm afraid, and I know that residents will be upset about that, but on the whole, it's a good use of this land.
Mr. Graham, do you want to make any comments at this stage, or will you just get back to Kate Weller in due course?
I'll go back to Kate Weller. I mean, I used to cover this area many years ago, and I got brought back in just recently. So I need to find out more information about it, because that might not have happened whilst I wasn't involved in the area. Thank you.
Okay, so this is a very interesting application. So I do encourage members to use the chat button to indicate that they want to speak on it. We will now hear from Councillor Jean Dunseith. Hello, good afternoon, Jean Dunseith.
Good afternoon, Chairman. Can you see me or hear me?
Yes, I can see you and I can hear you.
I'm generally in favour of this block of flats. I do have concerns about the car parking for 18 cars for 18 apartments. We all know that people nowadays don't move in one family, one car. So I'm just wondering where the other cars may go, because the streets around it are quite crowded anyway. On looking at the plans, I thought that the entry to the block of flats off the road may be too small. It looked to me as though it was only suitable, or I'll come up a bit, for one car at a time. I'm not sure that that is correct. It may be my impression, and I'd like some clarification on that, please. Amenity space. We have a plot of land, we have a big building on it, a big footprint. We don't have a lot of amenity space, and I presume with 18 flats, 2 bedrooms, we are going to have a number of children there, families with children. So we all know what it's been like during COVID-19, with people not being able to get out or getting out and not having anywhere to sit, etc., etc. So I do think it's very important for the residents of these flats to have somewhere to sit if they want to. And I'm particularly concerned about the children. But those are my only comments, Chairman. Thank you.
I'm going to invite Mr. Graham, the Highways Officer, to respond to your comments, Jean, and then we will hear from Sue Cocking. So, Mr. Graham, just picking up on the points raised by Councillor Dunseith.
I just scaled quickly off the plan, off as best I could off my screen, and it seems to be about length of a car park, the length of a car parking bay for the width of the access. It may be that it was historically, that it was when it's been negotiated and looked at, that it would have been 4.5 metres. Our standard nowadays is 5 metres for simultaneous access and egress. I would defer to the planning case officer to check up on that.
4.5 metres, Chairman, the width of the access point. 4.5.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Burden. So that's 4.5
Chairman,
metres.
Chairman, it sounds as though it's a little bit small then.
Mr. Graham?
4.5 was our old standard until fairly recently, so it could benefit from being half a metre wider. Yes, I'll have to accept that. Yeah.
And could we get that change made then, please?
Chairman, can I come in?
Mr. Burden?
Yeah, Chairman, I'm sure we could negotiate a slight amendment as part of a delegation, Chairman, to achieve
as part of the delegation, yes.
Yes, as part of a vehicular access modification to increase it from 4.5 to 5.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Dunseith. Councillor Susan Cocking.
I just wanted to say that I would be happy to second Councillor Ireland's approval of this application. It's housing that's desperately needed in Weymouth for local people, affordable housing, and like Kate Weller, I'm glad it's not like the designs at Boot Hill. Sorry for the designer, but as long as there is the condition in it that it's not for holiday homes, not to be resold for a profit, and that it will be for rent as well, which I believe it is. So I think it's and the design is fairly in keeping with the existing houses, and I think they've gone to a lot of trouble to actually make sure that that is right. So I'm quite happy with it.
Okay, thank you very much. What we'll do now, we'll next hear from Councillor David Shortell.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, my question is about the substation. Is that going to be totally removed or incorporated within the building, or perhaps underneath the amenity space? I just want to know what was going to happen to it, that's all.
Thank you, Councillor Shortell.
Chair.
So before Mr. Burden responds, if he would like to pick up on comments made by Councillor Shortell, and also can you talk about the windows? You talk about the fact that the building sits nicely with the brick of the Victorian villas, but it does seem to have aluminium windows. So would you like to comment on both what I've said and what David Shortell has said?
Yes, Chairman. I think, well, you're looking at a modern contemporary design, so it's a sort of crisp geometric design, basically, and part of that would be the use of fairly modern materials, and clearly a sort of powder coated or similar aluminium window treatment would be very much commensurate and consistent with the aesthetic of the crisp lines we have to the building. So that is something that our conservation officer was keen to achieve, and it's something that I would also support on that point. On the electricity substation, yes, you're right, there is a small substation currently on the site. That would be removed from the site. We did notify the electricity board on the application, but we didn't receive any comments back from them at all. But I understand from conversations with the applicant that, you know, all is well, and that there isn't a problem with it being removed from this particular site, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Burden. We'll now hear from Vice Chair Councillor David Gray.
Thank you, Chair. I'm generally in favour of this application. I think Brian's eloquent sort of conflict between the need for the housing and the compromises made. There's no more to be said. I have one very, very minor point, Bob. Could you put up the plan that shows the pop-out windows, please, at the back? My concern is that you talked about the pop-up windows, the front elevation being the front facing north, being frosted to stop any intrusion to 16 Buxton Road.
Yes,
that's correct, is it?
That applies to if you were standing in the garden of 16 Buxton Road, the garden at the back, and you were looking at the rear elevation of the proposed building, are you looking at this elevation here?
Yep.
Those 2-bedroom windows, which are over the far end of number 16's garden, which is the secluded private end, those would be obscure glazed north facing. So people in those bedrooms would not be able to look over the adjacent garden at the rear. They would only have views out of the slender side windows either side.
So my question is then, if they were stood looking westwards, they'd be looking straight at number 16, given the orientation of the window. So I just wanted to ask the question.
Yeah, let me show you another plan. So on this plan, the pop-out windows would be in this sort of location here. Okay.
Yeah. Right. So if you're looking out the side window, you'd be looking straight at number 16. You
would be looking, if you look to the east, you'd be looking along that way towards Won-the-Verne, but this is a very well developed landscape.
As I said, Bob, if you were looking west, you'd be looking into the garden of number 16.
Yeah, coming on to that point, you're right. If you look west, you would look along there. You're right, you would look over the front section of 16 Buxton Road's garden. Now, just to take you forward, so you would be looking over this bit of the garden.
Okay. You find that acceptable, I guess, because you haven't specified.
I do in this particular situation because of the it's you know, there's a subjective judgment to be made, and I made that with the benefit of having actually physically been on site and had conversations with the owner of the bungalow, and I felt in my judgment that it would involve very little overlooking that could be a problem, to be honest, because I appreciate how important this area beyond these trees here is as effectively what you would call effectively the back garden, if you like, of the property, because it hasn't got one in the back. So that was the approach I took. I rationalised in effectively this is sort of like the front garden, which quite often you get people looking over your front garden if you know it quite often happens in real life. But in this case, I sort of took an approach of, you know, where was the key most important quality amenity space, and that's the judgment I made, Chairman.
Then I'll trust your judgment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, both. So we have a proposal for approval from Councillor Nick Ireland that has been seconded by Councillor Susan Cocking. So we will now move to the vote. So,
Chair,
yes.
Chair, it's Ann Collins. Just to be clear, in terms of that proposal and second, is it in respect of delegating authority subject to the completion of section 106 and
Yes,
the amended
yes,
plan?
there will be the necessary delegations.
Yep, and the amended plan regarding the width of the access to be
with
increased to
respect
5
to
metres.
the width of the highway.
Yeah, the
access point to be clarified.
Yes, the access increased from 4.5 to 5 metres width, Chairman.
Indeed.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to be clear.
So, subject to those delegations, I'm now going to call upon Peter Barrow. Peter, are you in favour?
I'm in favour.
Councillor Kelvin Clayton?
Yeah, I'm happy to support that, Chair.
For the formality, Susan Cocking?
In favour.
Councillor Jean Dunseith?
Support, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor David Gray, Vice Chairman?
Support.
Councillor Nick Ireland for the formality?
In favour.
For the record, Councillor Louis O'Leary has sent his apologies today. Councillor David Shortell.
Thank you, Chairman. Happy to support.
Councillor Sarah Williams.
In favour.
And Councillor Kate Weller.
In favour.
And for the record, I'm also in favour. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Burden. We do not appear to have any urgent items. I do have an announcement to make in respect of the March meetings. Sorry, the meetings in the month of August. Notification that a previous provisional committee meeting to be arranged on Wednesday the 12th of August, in addition to the scheduled meeting on Thursday the 13th of August, both starting at 10 o'clock. That is due to a larger number of applications that needed to be considered next month. The Democratic Services Officer will circulate the invitations in due course. In the eventuality that an additional meeting on the 12th of August isn't required, then this can be cancelled at a later date. Future meetings will commence at 10 o'clock in order to appropriately manage the agendas. Also, in respect of future meetings, there may perhaps be less letters read out in accordance with a new protocol, and you will receive details of that, because clearly when it was envisaged that we would have virtual meetings, it wasn't necessarily envisaged that we would be receiving quite so many letters. So you will receive details of that in due course. So does anybody have any questions?
Yes, Chairman. About these letters, can you hear me?
Councillor Dunseith, yes.
Yeah, about these letters that are read out, you can sort of sit listening to what's being read out. Would it be possible for us to be informed we've got 10 letters of objection, or 20 letters of objection, or 5, and then how many you've got for the proposal? I think that would help, because sometimes you sit and they just go on and on and on.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Dunseith. Yeah, that is the direction of travel, that there will be less letters read out on the basis that there is a certain element of repetition. But you'll be contacted about that in all likelihood next week.
Thank you.
Just suffice it to say that the chairs and vice chairs of the 3 committees have met with the portfolio holder in respect of this matter. I don't know if David wants to add anything at this point that I haven't otherwise conveyed.
No, you've that's perfectly explained. I think the limitation on reading out letters will come in the next meeting, I think, which will be August.
Yes, thank you. Councillor Nick Ireland.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Can I just express a contrary view? I've been in several meetings recently where concerns been expressed that the public haven't been able to partake in and participate in our planning meetings to the extent that they used to be able to, and this seems to be a move towards actually reducing that. Personally, I would like to see members of the public attending via Teams and being on video or audio and reading out their own questions. That's my personal view. Maybe we should take this offline, but I just want to put it out there. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for that. I would also point out, and David is aware of this, the chair and vice chair will still have some discretion.
Chairman, if I could just say, I brought it up because I don't mind how many letters there are. It's just if we could be informed we're going to be reading out 5 letters or we're going to be reading out 10 letters.
Yes.
It's just the numbers so that we have an idea of where we are down the list and how many more to come. But I don't mind how many people write in.
Yes. the answer is that we will work on the basis that the chair and vice chair still have some discretion. I take on board Kate Weller's comments as well, and indeed Nick Ireland. So there will be the discretion of the chair and the vice chair. Would you like to add anything, David?
Only that the new arrangements which Philip is writing up at the moment will be written into the constitution. So there is less wriggle worth room now for the number of letters, but it's what was voted for. So I'm afraid we're stuck with it.
Right, thank you. Councillor Sarah Williams.
I can understand both arguments, but would we be able to, as committee members, see the correspondence prior to the meeting that would potentially have been read out, so we can look at it prior to the meeting?
Yeah, as I say, there will be further consultation on this, so I'm going to draw matters to a close. So you will hear from Philip Crowther in respect of that matter. Do we have any other business? No. In those circumstances, I declare the meeting closed, and thank you all and wish you a good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And officers, thank you.
Thank you.